Adrian Calloway stood at the window of his penthouse office, looking down at the bustling streets of New York City. His hands were clenched into fists, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. The morning newspaper lay on his desk, announcing his upcoming marriage to Victoria Stanford, heiress to the Stanford hotel chain. The marriage that would save his family's company. The marriage he never agreed to. "I won't do it," he said, not turning around to face his father, Richard Calloway, who sat in one of the leather chairs behind him. "You don't have a choice, Adrian." Richard's voice was cold and firm. "The Stanford merger is the only thing that can save us from bankruptcy. Your grandfather built this empire from nothing. Are you really willing to let it crumble because of your stubbornness?" Adrian finally turned around. At 35, he had his father's strong jaw and dark hair, but his mother's gentle eyes. Those eyes now blazed with anger. "I'm not a piece of property you can trade for a business deal," he said. "Victoria Stanford is cold, calculating, and only interested in social status. I won't spend my life with someone like that." Richard stood up, his face reddening. "You have 2 weeks until the engagement party. Either you show up and announce your marriage to Victoria, or I'll make sure you never see a penny of your inheritance." After his father stormed out, Adrian loosened his tie and sank into his chair. His eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk, him as a child with his mother, both smiling at the camera. She had died 10 years ago, and sometimes he wondered if things would be different if she were still alive. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sofia Martinez, one of the cleaning staff, entered quietly with her cleaning cart. She was in her late 20s with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and warm brown eyes that always seemed to hold a hint of sadness. "I'm sorry, Mr. Calloway. I can come back later," she said, starting to back out. "No, stay," Adrian said. Something about her presence always had a calming effect on him. She moved around his office quietly, dusting and emptying trash bins. He watched her work, noting how she treated everything with care, even the most mundane objects. Suddenly an idea struck him. It was crazy, desperate even, but it might be his only way out. "Sophia," he called out. She turned to look at him, surprise evident on her face. He rarely spoke to her directly. "Yes, Mr. Calloway? How long have you worked here?" 3 years, sir." "And you have a son, right? I've seen the photo on your cleaning cart." Sophia's face softened at the mention of her son. "Yes, Tommy, he's 8. Adrian stood up and walked closer to her. "Sophia, I'm about to make you an unusual proposal. You can say no and nothing will change. You'll keep your job and we'll never speak of this again." She looked at him with confusion but didn't back away. "I need a wife," he said bluntly. Sophia's eyes widened and she almost dropped her cleaning cloth. "Not a real one," he quickly added. "I need someone to marry me for show, to help me avoid an arranged marriage my family is forcing on me. It would be a business arrangement. You'd get $10 million, a house of your own, and the best education money can buy for your son." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia stared at him as if he had gone mad. Maybe he had. "Why me?" she finally whispered. "Because you're honest. I've watched you work for 3 years. You never gossip, never try to get attention, and you genuinely care about doing a good job. I need someone I can trust." Sophia's hands were trembling. "Mr. Calloway, call me Adrian. If you're going to be my wife, even just on paper, we should be on a first-name basis." She shook her head slightly as if trying to clear it. "This is crazy, I know, but I'm desperate. My father is trying to force me to marry Victoria Stanford. It's a business arrangement disguised as a marriage. At least with you, I'd be helping someone who deserves it." Sophia looked down at her hands, then back up at him. Something flickered. In her eyes, something he couldn't quite read. "Can I have time to think about it?" "You have until tomorrow morning. That's all the time I can give you." She nodded and quietly went back to her cleaning cart. As she reached the door, she paused. "Mr. Calloway, Adrian," she corrected herself. "Whatever I decide, thank you for thinking of me and Tommy." After she left, Adrian sat back down at his desk. He had just offered marriage to his cleaning lady. His father would have a heart attack. But as crazy as it was, something about it felt right. There was something about Sophia, something genuine and pure that he had never seen in the socialites his family wanted him to marry. What he didn't know was that Sophia was now in the employee bathroom, tears streaming down her face as she looked at herself in the mirror, because Adrian Calloway had no idea who she really was. He didn't remember that rainy night 5 years ago when he had saved her life, and she wasn't sure if she should tell him. The truth could change everything, but then again, maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. Sophia's small apartment was quiet except for the sound of the old ceiling fan spinning overhead. Tommy was already asleep in his room, surrounded by his superhero posters and second-hand toys. She sat at their tiny kitchen table, staring at a cup of cold coffee and thinking about Adrian Calloway's proposal. $10 million, a new house, a better education for Tommy. It seemed like a dream, but Sophia knew better than most that dreams could turn into nightmares. She got up and walked to Tommy's room, carefully opening the door. Her son was sleeping peacefully, his dark curls spread across the pillow. The moonlight coming through the window highlighted the scar on his cheek, a reminder of that terrible night 5 years ago. Sophia closed her eyes, and the memories came flooding back. The rain, the dark alley, the men who had cornered her and Tommy, and then Adrian Calloway appearing like an angel in an expensive suit, fighting off the attackers and driving them to the hospital. He had paid for Tommy's surgery, made sure they were safe, and then disappeared from their lives. 3 years later, when she saw the cleaning job posting at Calloway Industries, it had felt like fate. She had taken the job, keeping her head down, never mentioning that night. Adrian hadn't recognized her. Why would he? She had been just another person he had helped and forgotten, but she had never forgotten him. The sound of her phone ringing startled her. It was Maria, her best friend and fellow cleaning staff member. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice something was wrong?" Maria's voice was concerned. "You've been distracted all day. What happened?" Sophia sat back down at her kitchen table. "If someone offered you a chance to change your life completely, but you had to keep a huge secret, would you do it? What kind of secret are we talking about? I can't tell you the details, but it's nothing illegal. It's just complicated." Maria was quiet for a moment. "Sophia Martinez, you're the most honest person I know. If you're even considering keeping a secret, it must be for a good reason." "It's for Tommy," Sophia whispered, "to give him everything I never could." "Then maybe it's not really a secret. Maybe it's just your past and you get to decide when to share it." After hanging up, Sophia walked to her small living room. She opened the bottom drawer of an old cabinet and pulled out a newspaper clipping from 5 years ago. The headline read, "Local businessman stops violent attack." The photo was blurry, but you could make out Adrian Calloway talking to the police. She had kept it all these years, a reminder that good people still existed in the world. The next morning, Sophia arrived at work early. Her hands were trembling as she pushed her cleaning cart toward Adrian's office. She had made her decision. Adrian was already there, standing by the window just like yesterday. He turned when she entered, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Yes," Sophia said quietly. Adrian blinked. "Yes? I'll marry you. But I have conditions." He gestured for her to sit down, but she remained standing. She needed to be strong for this. First, everything has to be legal and proper. No shortcuts that could cause problems later. Adrian nodded. "Of course, I'll have my personal lawyer draw up all the necessary papers. Second, I keep my job." This made him frown. "Sophia, you'll be my wife. You don't need to clean offices anymore." "Maybe." "Not, but I want to. I'm not ashamed of being a cleaning lady, and I won't pretend to be something I'm not." Something like respect flickered in Adrian's eyes. "Okay, what else?" "Third, and most important, everything about this arrangement stays between us. No one can know it's not real. Not your family, not the press, not even my best friend, because if anyone finds out, they could use it against us," Adrian finished. "I agree. The truth stays between us." Sophia took a deep breath. "Then we have a deal." Adrian stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out a business card. "This is my lawyer's number. Meet him this afternoon. He'll start the paperwork and transfer the first payment to your account." Sophia took the card, her fingers brushing against his. For a moment their eyes met and she saw something there. Gratitude, relief, and maybe something else she couldn't quite name. "Thank you, Sophia. he said softly. She nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. One more thing, the engagement party is in 2 weeks. We'll need to announce our marriage there, in front of my family and the Stanfords. Are you ready for that? Sophia thought about Tommy's scar, about that rainy night, about all the times she had watched Adrian from afar, wishing she could thank him properly for saving them. I'm ready, she said, and walked out of his office. What she didn't see was Adrian watching her leave, a curious expression on his face. Something about her seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place it, like a memory from a dream, always just out of reach. In her employee locker, Sophia carefully placed the newspaper clipping in her purse. Soon, she would be Adrian Calloway's wife. She would live in his world, see him every day, pretend to be in love with the man who had saved her life without even knowing it. The irony was, she didn't need to pretend. She had been half in love with him since that rainy night 5 years ago, but that was her secret to keep, at least for now. As she pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, Sophia whispered a quiet prayer. Please let me be strong enough for what's coming. She had no idea just how much strength she would need. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind. Sophia's simple life transformed into something out of a fairy tale, but not the kind with singing birds and glass slippers. This was the kind where every decision could change everything. Adrian's lawyer, James Morton, had been efficient and discreet. The marriage contract was ironclad. The money had been transferred to a trust for Tommy, and Sophia had signed more papers than she had in her entire life. But none of it felt real until the day Adrian showed up at her apartment. We need to make this convincing, he said, standing awkwardly in her small living room. His expensive suit looked out of place among her second-hand furniture. The engagement party is in 3 days. Everyone needs to believe we're in love. Sophia nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. What do you suggest? First, we need our story, how we fell in love. We could say it happened gradually, Sophia said, thinking of how she had actually fallen for him over the years. Simple moments, small kindnesses. Adrian sat down on her worn couch, looking thoughtful. That could work. I noticed you while you were cleaning my office. You were different from everyone else in my world, genuine, real. And I saw past the wealthy businessman to the real you, Sophia added softly. Adrian looked at her with surprise. You're good at this, if he only knew how much of it was true. Tommy chose that moment to burst through the front door home from school. He stopped dead when he saw Adrian on their couch. Mom? Tommy's hand went unconsciously to the scar on his cheek. Sophia took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been dreading. Tommy, this is Adrian. We need to talk about some changes that are going to happen. Adrian stood up, and Sophia saw recognition flash in his eyes as he looked at Tommy. Have we met before? Sophia's heart stopped. But Tommy, bless him, just shook his head. They had practiced this. No, sir. Nice to meet you. Adrian seemed uncertain but didn't push it. Instead, he knelt down to Tommy's level. Your mum tells me you're interested in science, is that true? Tommy nodded cautiously. Well, I happen to know about a school with one of the best science programs in the city. How would you feel about going there? Tommy's eyes lit up, but he looked at Sophia first. Mum, that's part of what we need to talk about, honey. Adrian and I are getting married. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Then Tommy did something that surprised them all. He hugged Adrian. Thank you for making my mum smile again, he whispered. Adrian looked stunned, then slowly hugged Tommy back. Sophia had to turn away to hide her tears. The next few days were a blur of preparations. Adrian's personal shopper arrived with racks of designer clothes for Sophia. His interior decorator showed her photos of the wing in his mansion that would be her space. His personal assistant gave her a crash course in which fork to use at fancy dinners, but the hardest part was the dancing lessons. We'll have to dance at the party, Adrian explained as they stood in his private ballroom. Everyone will be watching. Sophia had never felt more out of place than she did in that enormous room with its crystal chandeliers and mirror-covered walls. Adrian put one hand on her waist and took her other hand in his. Just follow my lead, he said softly. The music started and they began to move. Sophia kept her eyes on their feet, counting steps in her head. "Look at me," Adrian said. "Don't think about the steps, just feel the music." She looked up, and suddenly she was lost in his eyes. They were the same kind eyes she remembered from that rainy night, the eyes that had promised her everything would be okay. They moved together as if they had done this 1,000 times before. Adrian's hand was warm on her waist, and she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that made her dizzy. "You're a natural," he said, smiling down at her. "I'm full of surprises," she replied, thinking of all the surprises she was still keeping from him. The night before the engagement party, Adrian insisted on having dinner with Sophia and Tommy in their apartment. He brought takeout from an expensive restaurant, but they ended up eating it on paper plates while sitting on cushions on the floor. Tommy was telling Adrian about his science project, complete with wild hand gestures that made them all laugh. For a moment, they looked like a real family. "You know," Adrian said later as they cleaned up the containers, "I thought this arrangement would be difficult, but being with you and Tommy, it feels right." Sophia almost dropped the plate she was holding. "Adrian, I mean it," he said, turning to face her. "You've given up so much to help me. I want you to know that I'll do everything I can to make sure you and Tommy are happy." The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache, because tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow they would face his family, the Stanfords, and the entire New York social elite. Tomorrow their pretense would be put to the ultimate test. As Adrian was leaving, he paused at the door. "Sophia, there's something familiar about you and Tommy, like I've seen you before somewhere." Sophia's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "New York is a big city, but sometimes it feels small." He nodded, still looking puzzled. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a big day." After he left, Sophia sat on her bed and pulled out the old newspaper clipping. Tomorrow she would walk into the lion's den on Adrian's arm. She would face his family, his almost fiancé, and all the sharks of high society. And she would do it all while carrying the weight of a secret that could change everything. "Please," she whispered to the photo of Adrian in the newspaper. "Please, let me be enough to protect you the way you protected us." In his penthouse across town, Adrian stood on his balcony looking at the city lights. Something about Sophia and Tommy nagged at his memory, like a word on the tip of his tongue. But more than that, something about them made him feel complete. Real human. Tomorrow he would shock his family and destroy their plans for his future. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. Neither of them slept much that night, each lost in thoughts of what tomorrow would bring. They had no idea that the engagement party would change their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted. The Callaway mansion glittered like a jewel that evening. Hundreds of lights illuminated the garden where New York's elite gathered for what they thought would be Adrian's engagement party to Victoria Stanford. Champagne flowed freely, and the air was filled with the sound of classical music and polite laughter. Sophia sat in front of the vanity mirror in one of the mansion's guest rooms, hardly recognizing herself. The emerald green dress Adrian had chosen for her fit perfectly, making her look like she belonged in this world of wealth and privilege. Her dark hair had been styled by Adrian's personal hairdresser, and the diamond earrings he had given her caught the light with every movement. "You look beautiful, Mom," Tommy said from where he sat on the bed in his new suit. He had insisted on being there for moral support. A knock at the door made them both jump. It was Adrian, looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Sophia stood up, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "As ready as I'll ever be." Adrian walked over and took her hands in his. "Remember, you have nothing to prove to these people. You're worth more than all of them. Put together." The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache. If he only knew the whole truth. Tommy hugged them both before heading downstairs to the children's area that had been set up for the guests' kids. As they watched him go, Adrian squeezed Sophia's hand. "Shall we face the music?" The grand staircase curved down to the main hall where the guests were gathering. As they descended together, a hush fell over the crowd. Sophia could feel hundreds of eyes on them, hear the whispers starting. Richard Calloway stood at the bottom of the stairs, his face turning red with anger. Next to him, Victoria Stanford looked like she had been slapped, her perfectly made up face twisted in shock. "Adrian," Richard's voice was tight with controlled fury. "What is the meaning of this?" Adrian's grip on Sophia's hand tightened. "Father, everyone, I have an announcement to make." The room fell silent. Even the musicians stopped playing. "I know you all came here expecting me to announce my engagement to Victoria Stanford, but I can't do that, because I'm already in love with this amazing woman right here." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Victoria's champagne glass shattered on the marble floor. "This is Sophia Martinez," Adrian continued, his voice strong and clear. "She's kind, genuine, and sees me for who I really am, not what I'm worth. And in 2 weeks, she's going to be my wife." Richard Calloway looked like he was about to have a stroke. "Your wife, the cleaning lady? Have you lost your mind?" "No, Father. For the first time in my life, I'm thinking clearly." Victoria stepped forward, her designer dress rustling. "Adrian, darling, you can't be serious. What about our arrangement? The merger? That's all it ever was to you, wasn't it? An arrangement. A business deal. Well, I'm done being a pawn in everyone's games." Sophia felt Victoria's cold eyes on her. "And what about you, little Miss Martinez? Are you proud of yourself for seducing a billionaire? Was this your plan all along?" Before Sophia could respond, an unexpected voice rang out. "Don't you dare speak to her like that." Everyone turned to see Tommy standing at the edge of the crowd, his small face fierce with determination. "My mom is the best person in the world," he said, his voice trembling but strong. "She works harder than anyone I know, and she makes Adrian happy. I've seen it." Adrian walked over and put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "He's right. Sophia and Tommy make me happier than I've ever been. They're my family now, and anyone who has a problem with that can leave. Right now." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, people began to move. Some left, shooting disapproving glances their way. Others stayed, watching the drama unfold with barely concealed interest. Richard Calloway stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "You're making a terrible mistake, son. This woman, she'll ruin everything we've built." "No, Father. You're the one who's making a mistake. If you can't accept my choice, then maybe it's time for me to leave Calloway Industries. You wouldn't dare. Try me." The two men stared at each other, decades of tension crackling between them. Finally, Richard turned on his heel and stormed out, Victoria following close behind. As soon as they were gone, Sophia felt her knees go weak. Adrian caught her before she could fall. "I've got you," he whispered. "You were amazing." Tommy hugged them both, and for a moment they stood there together, a strange little family in the middle of the chaos they had created. But the night wasn't over yet. As the remaining guests mingled and gossiped, an elderly woman approached them. She walked with a cane, but her back was straight and her eyes were sharp. "Eleanor," Adrian said, surprised. "I didn't know you were here. I wouldn't miss this for the world, my dear boy." Eleanor Calloway, Adrian's grandmother, looked at Sophia with keen interest. "So, you're the young lady who's turned my grandson's world upside down." Sophia felt herself being examined by those wise old eyes. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Calloway. Call me Eleanor, dear. And you must be Tommy." She smiled at the boy. "I hear you're quite the scientist," Tommy beamed. "I want to cure cancer when I grow up." "Ambitious. I like that." Eleanor turned back to Adrian. "Your grandfather would have approved, you know. He always said love was more important than money. That's why he married me, a simple secretary, instead of the society girl his parents had picked out." Adrian's eyes widened. "I never knew that. There's a lot you don't know about our family history, dear. Perhaps it's time you learned." Eleanor patted Sophia's hand. "Come have tea with me tomorrow, both of you. We have much to discuss." As Eleanor walked away, Adrian pulled Sophia closer. "I think we just got grandmother's blessing. That's worth more than father's approval any day." The party continued around them, but Sophia barely noticed. Her mind was spinning with everything that had happened. They had survived the announcement, but at what cost? Adrian had just risked everything. His relationship with his father, his position in the company, his entire future. all for their fake marriage. The guilt of her secret weighed heavier than ever. Later that night, as they stood on the mansion's balcony looking at the stars, Adrian turned to her. "Thank you," he said softly, "for giving me the courage to finally stand up to my father." Sophia looked at him, at the man who had saved her life 5 years ago and was now saving it again in a different way. "Adrian, there's something I need to tell you." But before she could continue, his phone rang. The caller ID showed James Morton, his lawyer. "I need to take this," Adrian said apologetically. "But we'll talk later, okay?" Sophia nodded, watching him walk away. The truth would have to wait a little longer. Inside the mansion, Eleanor Calloway sat in her study, looking at an old newspaper clipping, the same one Sophia had kept all these years. She smiled to herself. Well, she murmured, "this is going to be more interesting than I thought." The morning after the engagement party, Sophia woke up in a guest room at the Calloway mansion that was bigger than her entire apartment. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, making the silk bedding shimmer. For a moment, she thought, it had all been a dream, but then she saw the emerald dress from last night draped over a chair, and reality came crashing back. Everything had changed, and there was no going back. A gentle knock at the door made her sit up. It was Tommy, already dressed in new clothes that probably cost more than his entire old wardrobe. "Mom, you have to see this." He was holding a tablet, his eyes wide with excitement and worry. Sophia's heart sank when she saw the screen. Their faces were splashed across every news website and social media platform. "Billionaire's shocking romance with cleaning lady," screamed one headline. "Calloway heir dumps heiress for MAID," proclaimed another. "Are you okay, Mom?" Tommy asked, climbing onto the bed next to her. Sophia hugged him close. "As long as I have you, I'm always okay." Another knock at the door revealed Adrian, looking tired but determined. He was already dressed in a suit, ready for battle. "I see you've seen the news," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry about all this." Sophia shook her head. "Don't apologize, we knew this would happen." "Still, some of these stories," Adrian's jaw clenched. "The things they're saying about you." "Let them talk," Sophia said firmly. "I know who I am." Adrian looked at her with something like admiration. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." Before Sophia could respond, Adrian's phone buzzed. His face darkened as he read the message. "What is it?" Sophia asked. "Father has called an emergency board meeting. He's trying to force me out of the company." Tommy jumped up. "He can't do that. It's your company too." Adrian ruffled Tommy's hair. "Don't worry, buddy. I won't go down without a fight." He turned to Sophia. "But first, we have tea with Grandmother Eleanor." Eleanor, Calloway's private sitting room was like stepping back in time. Antique furniture, oil paintings, and the smell of old books created an atmosphere of aged elegance. The old lady sat in her favorite armchair like a queen on her throne. "Sit down, dears," she said, gesturing to the sofa. "Martha, bring us some tea." As the housekeeper served tea in delicate china cups, Eleanor studied Sophia over her reading glasses. "So, tell me, dear, how did you and Adrian really meet?" Sophia's hand trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. "What do you mean?" "Oh, please," Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "I may be old, but I'm not stupid. There's more to this story than a billionaire falling in love with his cleaning lady." Adrian started to protest, but Eleanor cut him off. "Adrian, darling, would you mind giving Martha a hand in the kitchen? I believe she's having trouble with those scones I like." It was a clear dismissal. Adrian looked uncertain, but Sophia nodded that it was okay. Once he was gone, Eleanor leaned forward. "Now then, let's talk about that rainy night 5 years ago." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. "How did you—" "I keep track of everything that happens in this family." Eleanor pulled out a familiar newspaper clipping. "Including when my grandson plays hero in a dark alley?" Tears filled Sophia's eyes. "I never meant to deceive him." "Of course you didn't, dear. You were protecting yourself and your boy, but now you're in deeper than you ever planned to be, aren't you?" Sophia nodded, unable to speak, and somewhere along the way those feelings became real. "How did you know?" Eleanor's eyes softened. "Because I see the way you look at him," It's the same way I used to look at Adrian's grandfather. She reached out and patted Sophia's hand. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know, Sophia whispered. If I tell him the truth now, he'll think everything was a lie. Or, Eleanor said thoughtfully, he might finally understand why he's felt drawn to you all this time. Before they could continue, Adrian returned. He looked between them suspiciously. What are you two plotting? Just girl talk, dear, Eleanor said innocently. Now tell me about this board meeting. Adrian's face hardened. Father is trying to use an old clause in the company bylaws. Since I'm going against the board's wishes regarding the Stanford merger, he claims I'm acting against the company's interests. Is he now? Eleanor's eyes glinted dangerously. Well, we'll just see about that. She rang a small bell, and Martha appeared with a large leather-bound book. Your grandfather's original company. Documents, Eleanor explained, opening the book carefully, including a few clauses your father seems to have forgotten about. As Eleanor explained her plan, Sophia watched Adrian's face change from worry to hope to determination, but her own mind was elsewhere, still wrestling with her secret. Later that afternoon, as Adrian prepared for the board meeting, Sophia stood in his home office, watching him gather his documents. I should come with you, she said. Adrian shook his head. No, this is something I need to face alone. He paused, then added, Sophia, I know there's something you've been trying to tell me. Sophia's heart raced. Adrian, But they were interrupted by James Morton bursting into the office. Adrian, we have a problem, the lawyer said urgently. Victoria Stanford just filed a lawsuit claiming breach of promise. And there's more. She's hired investigators to dig into Sophia's past. The world seemed to stop spinning. Sophia grabbed the edge of Adrian's desk to steady herself. Let them investigate, Adrian said firmly. Sophia has nothing to hide. But as he turned to leave, Sophia caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. She saw herself on that rainy night, terrified and grateful, watching Adrian Calloway walk away after saving her life. Now he was walking into another battle for her, not knowing the truth that could change everything. Eleanor's words echoed in her mind. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Sophia looked down at her engagement ring, a beautiful emerald surrounded by diamonds that Adrian had given her this morning. It represented both a lie and the deepest truth she had ever known. Time was running out. Soon, Victoria's investigators would discover the truth, and when they did, everything would change. Again. The Calloway Industries boardroom was silent, except for the sound of expensive shoes on polished marble as the board members filed in. Richard Calloway sat at the head of the table, a stack of papers in front of him, and victory already gleaming in his eyes. Adrian walked in last, his head held high. The morning newspapers were scattered across the table, each one bearing headlines about his scandal. He ignored them all. Now that we're all here, Richard began, his voice dripping with false concern, we need to discuss the future of Calloway Industries. My son's recent behavior has put our company at risk. You mean my refusal to marry for business? Adrian's voice was calm but firm. I mean your complete disregard for this company's well-being. Richard slammed his hand on the table. The Stanford merger would have secured our future. Instead, you've chosen to embarrass us all by taking up with a cleaning woman. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Sophia paced in Adrian's study. Tommy sat doing his homework, but his eyes kept straying to his mother. Mom, why don't you just tell him the truth? Sophia stopped pacing. It's not that simple, honey. Yes, it is. Adrian saved us. He's good. He'll understand. Before Sophia could respond, Eleanor Calloway appeared in the doorway, leaning on her cane. Your son is wise beyond his years, she said. But right now, we have more pressing matters. The board meeting has started, and I think it's time we made our entrance. Sophia blinked in surprise. But Adrian said to stay here. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. My grandson, bless his heart, sometimes forgets that the most important battles aren't won in boardrooms, they're won in the heart. Now come along, Martha will watch Tommy. Back in the boardroom, the situation was getting heated. The numbers don't lie, Victoria Stanford's father was saying. He had been invited to the meeting as a concerned party. Without our merger, Callaway Industries will lose millions in potential revenue. And with it, we lose our soul, Adrian countered. This company was built on innovation and integrity, not corporate marriages. Richard's face was turning red. You dare talk about integrity? You who threw away a perfectly good match for some gold-digging cleaning woman? Don't you dare talk about Sophia that way. Adrian's composure finally cracked. Or what? Richard sneered. You'll throw away your inheritance for her too? Go ahead. The board has already decided. You're out, Adrian. We're invoking the clause that allows us to remove any executive whose actions threaten the company's stability. A slow clapping sound echoed through the room. Everyone turned to see Eleanor Callaway standing in the doorway, Sophia beside her. Well done, Richard, Eleanor said, walking into the room. You've just proved you know nothing about this company's true heritage. Mother, this is a closed meeting, Richard protested. Oh, then perhaps we should discuss the other clauses in the company charter. Like the one that gives the founder's widow, that would be me, the power to veto any board decision. The room erupted in chaos. Richard jumped to his feet. That clause is ancient. It hasn't been used in decades. But it's still valid, Eleanor said calmly. She pulled out the leather-bound book from earlier. Would anyone like to see the documentation? While the board members argued, Sophia's eyes met Adrian's across the room. The love and gratitude she saw there made her heart ache. She couldn't keep lying to him. I have something to say, she announced, her voice cutting through the noise. Everyone fell silent, staring at her. Adrian started to walk toward her, but she held up her hand to stop him. 5 years ago, on a rainy night in New York, my son and I were attacked in an alley. Sophia's voice trembled but grew stronger as she continued. We would have died that night if a stranger hadn't saved us. A man in an expensive suit who fought off our attackers and drove us to the hospital. A man who paid for my son's surgery and disappeared before we could thank him properly. Adrian's face had gone pale. Memory flickered in his eyes. That man was you, Adrian, Sophia said softly. You saved our lives that night, and you didn't even know our names. The boardroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Adrian stared at Sophia, recognition finally dawning on his face. The boy with the scar, he whispered. Tommy, and you, I knew you seemed familiar. 3 years ago, when I saw the cleaning job posting at Callaway Industries, it felt like fate. I took the job hoping to find a way to thank you someday. I never imagined... Tears were streaming down Sophia's face now. When you asked me to marry you, I should have told you the truth. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd think I had planned it all. Afraid you wouldn't believe that somewhere along the way, my gratitude turned into love. Love? Adrian's voice was hoarse. Yes, love. Real love. Not part of our arrangement. Not because you saved us, but because of who you are. The man who risks everything to do what's right, who treats everyone with kindness, who makes my son laugh and makes me feel like I belong somewhere for the first time in my life. Sophia pulled off her engagement ring and held it out to him. I understand if you want to end our arrangement. I've been lying to you and you deserve better than that. But you deserve to know the truth and to know that there's at least one person in this room who loves you for exactly who you are. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Callaway looked like he might explode. Victoria Stanford's father was scribbling furiously in his notebook. The board members whispered among themselves, but Adrian didn't seem to notice any of them. He walked slowly toward Sophia, his eyes never leaving hers. All this time, he said quietly, I thought something was missing. Some piece of my life that didn't make sense. Now I know what it was. He reached out and closed her fingers around the ring. Keep it. It was always meant for you. But the lie was born out of gratitude and grew into love. Just like my convenient arrangement grew into something real. He smiled. I think I've been falling in love with you twice. Once 5 years ago when your bravery in protecting Tommy impressed me so much. And again these past weeks as I've gotten to know your heart. Eleanor Callaway's voice cut through the moment. Well, Richard, it seems your son has not only found true love, but has proven himself to be exactly the kind of man this company needs. one who values people over profits and recognizes real worth when he sees it. She turned to the board members. Now, shall we vote on whether to keep my grandson as CEO, or would you prefer I use my veto power right now? The vote was unanimous. Adrian stayed. As the board members filed out, many of them stopping to congratulate, Adrian and Sophia, Richard Calloway remained in his chair, defeated. Victoria Stanford's father was already on his phone, presumably cancelling the lawsuit. "Father," Adrian said, still holding Sophia's hand, "I hope someday you'll understand that some things are worth more than money." Richard didn't respond, but as they turned to leave, Sophia caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Outside the boardroom, Tommy was waiting with Martha. He ran to hug them both. "Did you tell him?" he asked Sophia eagerly. "She told everyone," Adrian said, picking Tommy up. "And you know what? I think it's time we all went home, our home." As they walked out together, Eleanor watching them with satisfaction, Sophia realized that sometimes the biggest lies could lead to the deepest truths. And sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales could come true in the most unexpected ways. But their story wasn't over yet, because even the happiest endings are really just new beginnings in disguise. The Calloway Industries boardroom was silent, except for the sound of expensive shoes on polished marble as the board members filed in. Richard Calloway sat at the head of the table, a stack of papers in front of him, and, victory already gleaming in his eyes, Adrian walked in last, his head held high. The morning newspapers were scattered across the table, each one bearing headlines about his scandal. He ignored them all. "Now that we're all here," Richard began, his voice dripping with false concern, "we need to discuss the future of Calloway Industries. My son's recent behavior has put our company at risk." "You mean my refusal to marry for business?" Adrian's voice was calm but firm. "I mean your complete disregard for this company's well-being." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "The Stanford merger would have secured our future. Instead, you've chosen to embarrass us all by taking up with a cleaning woman." Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Sophia paced in Adrian's study. Tommy sat doing his homework, but his eyes kept straying to his mother. "Mom, why don't you just tell him the truth?" Sophia stopped pacing. "It's not that simple, honey." "Yes, it is. Adrian saved us. He's good. He'll understand." Before Sophia could respond, Eleanor Calloway appeared in the doorway, leaning on her cane. "Your son is wise beyond his years," she said, "but right now, we have more pressing matters. The board meeting has started, and I think it's time we made our entrance." Sophia blinked in surprise. "But Adrian said to stay here." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "My grandson, bless his heart, sometimes forgets that the most important battles aren't won in boardrooms, they're won in the heart. Now come along, Martha will watch Tommy." Back in the boardroom, the situation was getting heated. "The numbers don't lie," Victoria Stanford's father was saying. He had been invited to the meeting as a concerned party. "Without our merger, Calloway Industries will lose millions in potential revenue. And with it, we lose our soul," Adrian countered. "This company was built on innovation and integrity, not corporate marriages." Richard's face was turning red. "You dare talk about integrity? You who threw away a perfectly good match for some gold-digging cleaning woman? Don't you dare talk about Sophia that way." Adrian's composure finally cracked. "Or what?" Richard sneered. "You'll throw away your inheritance for her too? Go ahead. The board has already decided. You're out, Adrian. We're invoking the clause that allows us to remove any executive whose actions threaten the company's stability." A slow clapping sound echoed through the room. Everyone turned to see Eleanor Calloway standing in the doorway, Sophia beside her. "Well done, Richard," Eleanor said, walking into the room. "You've just proved you know nothing about this company's true heritage." "Mother, this is a closed meeting," Richard protested. "Oh? Then perhaps we should discuss the other clauses in the company charter, like the one that gives the founder's widow, that would be me, the power to veto any board decision, VC." Room erupted in chaos. Richard jumped to his feet. "That clause is ancient. It hasn't been used in decades. But it's still valid," Eleanor said calmly. She pulled out the leather-bound book from earlier. "Would anyone like to see the documentation?" While the board members argued, Sophia's eyes met Adrian's across the room. The love and gratitude she saw there made her heart ache. She couldn't keep lying to him. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice cutting through the noise. Everyone fell silent, staring at her. Adrian started to walk toward her, but she held up her hand to stop him. 5 years ago, on a rainy night in New York, my son and I were attacked in an alley. Sophia's voice trembled but grew stronger as she continued. "We would have died that night if a stranger hadn't saved us. A man in an expensive suit who fought off our attackers and drove us to the hospital. A man who paid for my son's surgery and disappeared before we could thank him properly." Adrian's face had gone pale. Memory flickered in his eyes. "That man was you, Adrian," Sophia said softly. "You saved our lives that night, and you didn't even know our names." The boardroom was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Adrian stared at Sophia, recognition finally dawning on his face. "The boy with the scar," he whispered. "Tommy, and you, I knew you seemed familiar. 3 years ago, when I saw the cleaning job posting at Callaway Industries, it felt like fate. I took the job hoping to find a way to thank you someday. I never imagined—" Tears were streaming down Sophia's face now. "When you asked me to marry you, I should have told you the truth. But I was afraid. Afraid you'd think I had planned it all. Afraid you wouldn't. Believe that somewhere along the way my gratitude turned into love." "Love?" Adrian's voice was hoarse. "Yes, love. Real love. Not part of our arrangement. Not because you saved us, but because of who you are. The man who risks everything to do what's right, who treats everyone with kindness, who makes my son laugh and makes me feel like I belong somewhere for the first time in my life." Sophia pulled off her engagement ring and held it out to him. "I understand if you want to end our arrangement. I've been lying to you and you deserve better than that. But you deserve to know the truth, and to know that there's at least one person in this room who loves you for exactly who you are." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Callaway looked like he might explode. Victoria Stanford's father was scribbling furiously in his notebook. The board members whispered among themselves, but Adrian didn't seem to notice any of them. He walked slowly towards Sophia, his eyes never leaving hers. "All this time," he said quietly, "I thought something was missing. Some piece of my life that didn't make sense. Now I know what it was." He reached out and closed her fingers around the ring. "Keep it. It was always meant for you." But the lie was born out of gratitude and grew into love, just like my convenient arrangement grew into something real. He smiled. "I think I've been falling in love with you twice. Once 5 years ago when your bravery in protecting Tommy impressed me so much, and again these past weeks as I've gotten to know your heart." Eleanor Callaway's voice cut through the moment. "Well, Richard, it seems your son has not only found true love but has proven himself to be exactly the kind of man this company needs. One who values people over profits and recognizes real worth when he sees it." She turned to the board members. "Now shall we vote on whether to keep my grandson as CEO, or would you prefer I use my veto power right now?" The vote was unanimous. Adrian stayed. As the board members filed out, many of them stopping to congratulate Adrian and Sophia, Richard Callaway remained in his chair, defeated. Victoria Stanford's father was already on his phone, presumably cancelling the lawsuit. "Father," Adrian said, still holding Sophia's hand, "I hope someday you'll understand that some things are worth more than money." Richard didn't respond, but as they turned to leave, Sophia caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Outside the boardroom, Tommy was waiting with Martha. He ran to hug them both. "Did you tell him?" he asked Sophia eagerly. "She told everyone," Adrian said, picking Tommy up. "And you know what? I think it's time we all went home, our home." As they walked out together, Eleanor watching them with satisfaction, Sophia realized that sometimes the biggest lies could lead to the deepest truths. And sometimes, just sometimes, fairy tales could come true in the most unexpected ways. But their story wasn't over yet, because even the happiest endings are really just new beginnings in disguise. The days following the dramatic board meeting brought more changes than Sophia could have imagined. Moving into Adrian's mansion felt like stepping into another world, one where her small apartment and cleaning cart seemed like distant memories. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Adrian, as the movers brought in Tommy's science projects and her few precious belongings. They looked almost out of place among the mansion's expensive furnishings. "I've never been more sure of anything," Adrian said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "This house has never felt like a home until now." But not everyone shared their happiness. The society magazines were having a field day with their story. Every time Sophia went out, photographers followed her, trying to catch her making a mistake, doing something that would prove she didn't belong in Adrian's world. One morning, while Sophia was having breakfast with Tommy, Martha brought in the latest issue of Society Life. The cover showed a photo of Sophia shopping at her old neighborhood market, with the headline, "Callaway's cleaning lady, still shopping in the slums." "Don't look at that trash," Adrian said, snatching the magazine away. But Sophia had already seen it. "They're never going to accept me, are they?" she asked quietly. "They don't have to," Adrian replied. "I accept you, Tommy accepts you, grandmother accepts you, that's all that matters." But Sophia could see the strain in his eyes. The constant media attention was affecting Callaway Industries' stock prices. Some longtime clients were nervous about the company's new direction, and Richard Callaway, though defeated in the boardroom, wasn't done fighting. That afternoon, while Adrian was at work, Richard's wife Margaret showed up unannounced. "I thought we should talk woman to woman," Margaret said, her designer suit and perfect makeup making Sophia feel underdressed in her simple sundress. "Would you like some tea?" Sophia offered, trying to be polite. "This isn't a social call." Margaret cut her off. "I'm here to make you an offer. $20 million to leave Adrian and disappear." Sophia felt like she'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "Let's be realistic," Margaret continued, pulling out a checkbook. "You're causing our family nothing but embarrassment. Adrian's caught up in the romance of it all right now, but eventually he'll realize he needs someone from his own world, someone who knows how to handle the responsibilities of being a Callaway." "Like Victoria Stanford?" Sophia's voice was quiet, but firm. "Exactly. The merger with the Stanfords would secure our family's future. Instead, we're watching our company's reputation crumble because my son thinks he's in love with a cleaning lady." Sophia stood up, her hands shaking but her voice steady. "Mrs. Callaway, I understand you want to protect your family, but Adrian is my family now too, and I protect my family. By destroying his future, the press is tearing him apart because of you." "No," a new voice interrupted. "The press is tearing him apart because of us." Eleanor Callaway stood in the doorway, her face tight with anger. "Margaret, I suggest you leave now." After Margaret stormed out, Eleanor hugged Sophia. "Don't let them get to you, dear. The Callaways have always been fighters." "But what if she's right?" Sophia whispered. "What if I am destroying his future?" "Nonsense. You're his future." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "And I think it's time we showed everyone exactly why." The next day, Eleanor called a press conference. The media packed into Callaway Industries' main conference room, expecting another scandal. Instead, they got a history lesson. Eleanor stood at the podium, Sophia and Adrian beside her, and told the story of how Callaway Industries began. How Adrian's grandfather, a poor immigrant, fell in love with her, a simple secretary. How their love story had scandalized society, just like Sophia and Adrian's, and how that same society had eaten their words when the company became one of the most successful in the country. "History repeats itself," Eleanor announced, "and just like before, love will prove stronger than prejudice." The press ate it up. Suddenly, Sophia and Adrian's story wasn't just a scandal. It was a romantic legacy coming full circle. But not everyone was convinced. That evening, Sophia found Tommy crying in his room. "What's wrong, honey?" "Some kids at school said you only married Adrian for his money," Tommy sobbed. "They said we don't deserve to be here." Sophia held her son close, her heart breaking. "Tommy, look at me. Do you remember that night in the alley? How scared we were?" Tommy nodded. "Adrian saved us that night without knowing who we were. He helped us because it was the right thing to do. That's the kind of man he is, and that's why I love him, not for his money, but for his heart." I love him too, Tommy whispered. He's like the dad I never had. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. He loves you too, sweetheart. So much. Later that night, Adrian found them both in Tommy's room looking at old photos. Everything okay? He asked, sitting down with them. Just sharing memories, Sophia said. She showed him a photo of Tommy in the hospital after the alley incident, his face bandaged but smiling bravely. Adrian touched the photo gently. I remember that smile. It gave me hope that night, seeing how strong you both were. You remembered us? Sophia asked, surprised. Not consciously, but I think my heart remembered. That's why being with you and Tommy feels so right. He pulled them both close. You're not just my second chance at love, Sophia. You're my second chance at being the man I always wanted to be. As they sat there together, looking at old photos and sharing stories, Sophia realized something important. Yes, there would always be people who didn't approve. There would always be challenges and obstacles, but they had something stronger than all of that. They had love, trust, and a bond that had begun on a rainy night 5 years ago. Outside the mansion, reporters still lurked with their cameras. Society ladies still whispered behind their hands. Richard and Margaret Calloway still plotted in their own home, but inside in this moment none of that mattered. Because sometimes the biggest miracles come disguised as ordinary moments. A family looking at photos, a child's laughter, a love that began with an act of kindness and grew into something extraordinary. The cleaning lady and the billionaire. The fairy tale that wasn't supposed to happen, but it did happen. And their story was far from over, because sometimes the biggest challenges come just when you think you've found your happy ending. And the Calloway family was about to face their biggest challenge yet. The autumn wind whipped through New York, city streets as Sophia walked out of Tommy's new private school. 2 months had passed since the press conference, and life had settled into a new normal. Or so she thought. Mrs. Calloway, a teacher, rushed after her. Could we schedule a meeting? It's about Tommy. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Is something wrong? Not wrong, exactly. Tommy's science project, well, it's extraordinary. We think he might be gifted, really gifted. Pride swelled in Sophia's chest. Her son, who had once done his homework by candlelight when they couldn't pay the electric bill, was now thriving. But her joy was short-lived. As she walked to her car, she noticed a familiar figure waiting. Victoria Stanford. We need to talk, Victoria said, her designer coat fluttering in the wind. I have nothing to say to you. Oh, but you'll want to hear this. Victoria's smile was cold. It's about Richard Calloway's plans for Adrian. Sophia hesitated, then got into the car. Victoria slid into the passenger seat. Richard's been meeting with the board members privately, Victoria explained. He's convinced them that Adrian's too emotionally unstable to run the company. They're planning to force him out permanently this time. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to make a deal. Help me get Adrian back, and I'll make sure you and Tommy are taken care of financially, forever. Sophia stared at her. You really don't understand, do you? This isn't about money. It never was. Everything is about money, darling. You're just too naive to see it. Before Sophia could respond, her phone rang. It was Adrian, and he sounded worried. Sophia, where are you? You need to come to the office right now. 20 minutes later, Sophia walked into Adrian's office to find him pacing, his face pale. Eleanor was there too, sitting in a chair with a grim expression. What's wrong? Adrian handed her a tablet. On the screen was a news article. Calloway. Industries accused of massive fraud. Father's been cooking the books, Adrian said, his voice tight with anger and pain. For years. And now that I'm CEO, the evidence is surfacing. They're saying I must have known, that I was part of it. Sophia felt the floor sway beneath her feet. But you didn't know. Of course he didn't, Eleanor said firmly. Richard kept this hidden from everyone. But now he's using it as his trump card. Either Adrian steps down quietly, or he'll make sure. Adrian takes the fall for everything. He's my father, Adrian whispered. How could he do this? Sophia went to him, taking his hands in hers. Because he cares more about power than family. But you're not alone in this fight. She's right, Eleanor said, and I think I know someone who can help. Martha. The housekeeper appeared carrying a dusty old box. Your grandfather kept records of everything, Eleanor explained, opening the box, including some transactions that Richard never knew about. They spent hours going through old documents. Sophia's eyes were burning from reading endless financial statements, but she refused to give up. Suddenly, Tommy burst into the office, his face excited. "Mom! Dad! Look what I made!" Adrian's head snapped up at being called Dad for the first time. Tommy didn't even seem to notice he'd said it, too busy pulling something out of his backpack. It was his science project, a complex diagram showing how different types of energy could be converted and stored. "The teacher says it could revolutionize solar power storage," Tommy exclaimed. "Can we patent it like your company does?" Adrian stared at the diagram, then at Tommy, then at Sophia. Something clicked in his eyes. "That's it," he breathed. "Tommy, you're a genius." He rushed to his computer and started typing frantically. "What is it?" Sophia asked. "The fraud in the books. It's all centered around our energy division. Father's been hiding losses from failed projects. But what if we could turn those losses into gains? What if we had a breakthrough technology that could make everything legitimate?" Tommy's project, Sophia realized. Exactly. With some development, this could be exactly what we need. A real innovation, not just cooking the books. Eleanor smiled. Using a child's genius to save the company. How poetic. But their moment of hope was interrupted by Richard Calloway bursting into the office, followed by security guards and men in suits. "FBI," one of them announced. "We have a warrant to seize all company records." Richard's face was a mask of fake concern. "I'm sorry, son, but as chairman of the board, I had to report my suspicions. We can't let family loyalty interfere with legal obligations." Adrian stepped in front of Sophia and Tommy protectively. "You planned this all along, didn't you? Set me up to take the fall?" "You did this to yourself when you chose them over your real family," Richard spat. But Sophia had enough. She stepped forward, Tommy's project in her hands. "Actually, Mr. Calloway, your real problem isn't Adrian. It's me." Everyone turned to look at her. "You see, I used to clean your office too, late at night, when you thought no one was around. And I saw things, heard things, made copies of certain documents that seemed important." Richard's face went white. "You're bluffing." "Am I? Would you like me to tell these FBI agents about your meetings with offshore bankers, or about those late-night calls to numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands?" "Sophia," Adrian whispered, "what are you doing?" "Protecting our family," she said firmly. "Just like I've always done." Eleanor's laugh broke the tension. "Oh, Richard, you never did learn to respect the cleaning staff, just like you never learned that true wealth isn't about money. It's about having people who love you enough to fight for you." The FBI agents looked uncertainly between Richard and Sophia. "I suggest," Sophia said calmly, "that we all sit down and look at Tommy's new energy storage technology. It might just be the solution to everyone's problems. Unless, of course, Mr. Calloway would prefer we discuss those offshore accounts." Richard's face was a storm of emotions. Rage, fear, and finally, defeat. "Fine," he growled. "Let's talk." As they all sat down around Adrian's conference table, Sophia felt Tommy's hand slip into hers. On her other side, Adrian squeezed her shoulder. They had won this battle. But somehow, Sophia knew the war wasn't over yet, because Richard Calloway's eyes held a promise of revenge, and Victoria Stanford was still out there plotting. But for now, they were together. The cleaning lady who had kept secrets, the billionaire who had saved her life, and the brilliant little boy who might just save them all. Sometimes Sophia realized the biggest miracles come from the smallest hands. And sometimes the strongest weapons aren't money or power, but love and truth. The truth that had brought them together on a rainy night 5 years ago. The truth that would keep them together now. No matter what storms were coming. Christmas lights twinkled across New York City, but inside the Calloway mansion, tension crackled like static electricity. 3 months had passed since the confrontation in Adrian's office, and everything had changed. Tommy's energy storage technology had become the talk of the scientific community. Major tech companies were fighting for the rights to develop it. Callaway Industries' stock was soaring, but success had brought new dangers. "I don't like this," Sophia said, watching Tommy practice his presentation for the upcoming Science and Technology Convention. He would be the youngest presenter in the event's history. "He'll be fine," Adrian assured her. "We'll have security with him at all times." But Sophia couldn't shake her unease. The threatening letters had started arriving 2 weeks ago. Anonymous. Messages warning them to back off from the energy storage project. At first, they tried to hide them from Tommy, but he was too smart not to notice something was wrong. "Is someone trying to steal my invention?" he asked one night at dinner. Adrian and Sophia exchanged looks. Before they could answer, Eleanor spoke up. "Yes, dear, but that's because it's valuable, and we're going to protect it, and you." But protection proved harder than they thought. The next morning, Sophia found Tommy's laboratory in the basement ransacked. His computer was gone, along with all his research notes. The security cameras were disabled, the police officer said. This was professional work. Adrian was furious. It had to be father or Victoria. They're the only ones who know the mansion's security systems. But Richard Callaway had an ironclad alibi. He was in London, very publicly attending a business conference, and Victoria Stanford had been photographed at a charity gala in Paris. "Maybe we should withdraw from the convention," Sophia suggested. "No," Tommy protested. "This is my chance to help people, to make a difference like Adrian did for us that night in the alley." Sophia hugged her son, marveling at his courage. He had grown so much in these past months, not just in his scientific knowledge, but in his spirit. The day of the convention arrived with a fresh blanket of snow covering the city. The Manhattan Convention Center was packed with the world's leading scientists and technology experts. Tommy, wearing a new suit that matched Adrian's, looked both nervous and excited. "Ready, buddy?" Adrian asked, straightening Tommy's tie. "Ready." "Dad." The word still brought tears to Adrian's eyes. He had filed adoption papers last week, wanting to make official what his heart had known for months. Tommy was his son in every way that mattered. Sophia watched them from the side of the stage, her heart full of love and fear. Something felt wrong. The threatening letters, the break-in. It all seemed to be building to this moment. Tommy stepped up to the podium, his small figure dwarfed by the huge screen behind him. As he began his presentation, Sophia scanned the crowd. That's when she saw him. Michael Davis, Richard's old friend and business rival, slipping through a side door. And he wasn't alone. "Adrian," she whispered urgently. "Look." Victoria Stanford was with Michael, typing something on her phone with a satisfied smile. Before they could react, the lights went out. The huge screen behind Tommy flickered and went dark. And then, to their horror, new images appeared. Detailed schematics of Tommy's invention, along with emails and documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria's voice rang out through the darkness. "Before this child continues, you should know the truth. These designs weren't created by him. They were stolen from Davis Technologies 3 months ago. We have proof. The fee." Lights came back on. Michael Davis stood at the back of the hall holding up a stack of papers. "We have security footage," he announced, "showing this boy accessing our servers through his father's company credentials. The Callaways aren't innovators. They're thieves." Tommy stood frozen at the podium, tears in his eyes. "That's not true. I created this. I can prove it." But the damage was done. People were already whispering, taking photos, sending tweets. Sophia could see the headlines forming. "Child Genius a Fraud. Callaway Family Caught in Tech Theft." Adrian started to rush toward Victoria, but Sophia grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said. "Tommy, honey, show them your notebook." Tommy pulled out a battered composition book from his backpack. "My first designs," he said, his voice shaking but growing stronger. "From before we even met Adrian. When we were still living in our old apartment. Mom, remember? I used to work on it by candlelight when we couldn't pay the electric bill." Sophia nodded. "Show them the date, honey." The notebook was passed around. The crude drawings, dated and witnessed by Tommy's old science teacher, clearly showed the early stages of his invention, months before the dates on Davis Technologies documents. But Victoria wasn't done. "A convenient prop?" she sneered. "Easily falsified." "Actually," a new voice rang out, Everything in that notebook can be verified. Eleanor Calloway walked slowly to the stage, leaning on her cane. Martha followed, pushing a cart loaded with boxes. You see, Eleanor continued, I've been expecting something like this. That's why I had every page of Tommy's notebook authenticated by 3 independent experts. The paper, the ink, even the graphite from his pencil marks, all dated and certified. She turned to Michael Davis. And while we're talking about security footage, perhaps we should show everyone the real videos. The ones of you and Victoria, a meeting with the men who broke into our house, the same men who are currently in custody, singing like birds to avoid jail time. Victoria's face went pale. Michael started to move toward the exit, but security guards blocked his way. Did you really think, Eleanor said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room, that I wouldn't protect my family? I've spent 60 years watching people like you try to steal what others have built, but you made one crucial mistake. What's that? Victoria spat. You underestimated the power of love. Real love. The kind that makes a man stop to help strangers in an alley. The kind that makes a mother protect her child at all costs. The kind that makes a little boy want to change the world. Tommy had moved to stand between Adrian and Sophia, holding both their hands. This invention, Eleanor continued, was born from love. From a child who saw his mother struggle to pay electric bills. From a boy who wanted to make sure no one else would ever have to sit in the dark. And yes, from a family that believed in him. The room erupted in applause. Reporters who had been ready to write about a scandal were now scrambling to capture a different story. One of triumph over adversity, of faith rewarded, of love conquering all. As security led Victoria and Michael away, Sophia heard Tommy whisper, "We did it." Adrian knelt down to hug him. "No, son, you did it. You saved us all." Later that night, as snow fell softly outside the mansion's windows, the family sat together in the living room. Tommy was excitedly talking about all the companies that wanted to develop his invention. Adrian was already planning how to use the technology to help underserved communities. Sophia looked at them, her son, her husband, her new family, and felt tears of joy in her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Adrian asked softly. "That sometimes the best endings aren't really endings at all," she replied. "They're just beautiful beginnings." Eleanor, watching from her favorite chair, smiled knowingly, because she could see what they didn't yet realize. Their story was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning.